For this project, I decided to use the IBM Bluemix services as recommended by the professor. Um, I started just by reading up on how Bluemix worked and how instances were created, along with guides on the blockchain. And I'm kind of going to step through that process and show a simple use case. Um, First, we're going to go to the Services tab from the IBM Bluemix page and go down to the dashboard. And once you reach the dashboard, you'll see this page. You might not have any services already created, but these are the two blockchains that I created throughout this module. So we're going to start by going to Create App, and it'll bring us to the IBM Bluemix catalog where we can search for our blockchain service. And we'll see it here. And once you click on this, it'll bring us to like the creation page, which has a name that you want to give the service, along with the name for the credentials that are going to be assigned to the instance of the blockchain service. And it'll include some descriptions about configuration and sample images for what the application is used for, along with different pricing plans, but for this activity we're just going to keep it with the free pricing. So once we hit create, it'll take a few seconds and it'll bring us to our IBM Bluemix dashboard. And once we get to this application dashboard, we'll be able to see some simple things such as managing, which right now all we can do is launch it, and service credentials. And if we want to look at the service credentials, we can see information like peers and users that the blockchain will be using, along with if you have any other external connections through the IBM Bluemix system that you want to configure to the service. But to continue, we're just going to launch the dashboard, which is going to bring up this new tab. And right off the bat from the network tab, we can see 3 or 4 peers that are just automatically created for us, and a membership service. And these peers and service will help with the authentication of our blocks that we're adding to the blockchain, along with transactions and insertions and all of that fun stuff. So just going through some of the information that I used to learn about this, there's some demo chain codes that you can deploy, but I won't do that now. You can do that in your free time. But they're simply instances of transactions of currency. I guess example 2 would be marbles is different objects of trading marbles between people, and the commercial papers, which is a bit more in-depth about business documents and other information like that. I've also gone through some examples that include keeping track of vehicles with their vehicle identification numbers, colors, models, makes, things like that. But the thing that we're going to be working with today is the APIs that allow us to create our own blockchain, and along with that, interact with it from the IBM Bluemix Center. Starting off on this page, we can see information such as all these different tabs, such as blocks, blockchains, chain code, network, registered transactions. But we're going to start by just looking at our IDs and secrets. These are just kind of the identifications of the different users, and so from here I'm going to take all of this information, such as the users and their secrets, and just kind of put them into this WordPad here. We will use this later for adding a user into our system, just so we can interact with the blockchain and insert changes later. So to start, we just want to go to the register tab here and register a user with the blockchain service. So if you just look at some of the example here, it gives you an example of how to format it, and I've already created this here for our user type 1 underscore 1, and then its secret is here. So we're just going to paste that in here and try it out. And here we'll see the output, and we'll see the response body saying login successful for user type 10. And to continue from here, now that we have a proper user setup, we can start to initiate our chain code by using this pre-written code that I have used from a reference from IBM Bluemix documentation, and kind of just repurposed it for what I needed. So we set the secure context to our user type 10 that we just added, and along with just a simple init function with an argument that it's going to be fed in named test1. And the location of our chain code we have stored on a GitHub repository, which is just this address here, and I did this following another documentation guide on the IBM Bluemix site. And simply this path just has the chain code and some readmes from the guide and some steps that I followed. And from here we want to go into the chain code tab and just expand this post. And from here you can see different actions such as query, deploy, and invoke. Since we don't have a chain code running yet, we're going to start by putting this code here into the deploy and see what we get. So after we hit the try it out button, we can go down to our response body and see if it succeeded, and we can see that it's a status OK, and we receive this message back. And this message we're going to use for the future to just reference the blockchain itself. So this will be our path that we're going to use in future blockchain executions, such as query and invoke. Next, we're just going to want to go and look at our blockchain statuses. And if we look into here, we can already see that some blocks were created, and this is just me deploying the blockchain. You can just see deploy, and that's the type. And this is just me accidentally clicking it a few times, so disregard that. So now that we know that we have our blockchain up and running and it's creating blocks, we can start to look into querying the blockchain. So first we're going to go back into the chain code tab and look at the query section. So once we go to the query, we can start to define a query on what we're looking for inside of our blockchain and what information. And just a simple query that I adapted from one of the guides is this here. It includes information such as what we're doing, which is querying, and parameters, and the path to our chain code. And like I said before, when we initialized our chain code, we now have a unique path that is this long string of alphanumerics that uniquely identifies our Bluemix chain code, and along with what we're doing. What we're doing is we're just reading the contents of a hello world file that the blockchain is keeping track of. This can be considered as any information that we want to be stored or kept consistent and not tampered with. This can be information such as the weather, news bulletins, disaster alerts, anything like that you don't want people tampering with, but it needs to be consistent across all users. So we're going to take this query and just paste it into our query spec and press try it out. And you can see here, once again, we get a status OK, and we're going to receive back this message test1. And if you're unsure where that test1 came from, back here when we initialized or when we deployed the blockchain, we set the args for our hello world to this test1 string. So now next, we need to invoke a change to overwrite that test1 if we wanted to change it to something else. So now that we want to invoke a change, we're going to want to create some code that wants to write over what is already in that hello world file. We're going to go into this file here that I have with all of my sample code, and we're going to see my invoke code. Inside this, you can see that the method is invoke, and we have the parameter and the path that we're going to use up here. We want to change the. So here you can see the invoke method that we're going to be using, and you can see here that it's defined as a method invoke with parameters such as the name of our path that we're going to be accessing, which is the same as what we use for our query. But instead of before where we read, we're going to do a function write, and the arguments are going to take in the hello world file. We're going to change the hello world's information to snowstorm coming. So this is an example of if there was a snowstorm alert, that you could just update this and all peers on the network be able to see this change and validate it, and they would confirm to the network. So simply we're just next going to copy and paste this into our invoke spec here in the post for chain code, and press try it out. And we're going to scroll down to the response body, and once again we're going to see that the status is okay, which means it passed, and it's going to return this message. This message is pretty much just the confirmation. And so now if we wanted to revalidate that indeed this did change our contents, we can simply just delete that out of the invoke spec and go back to our query function and paste that back into our query spec and press try it out again and go down to the response body, and now we can see that the response body says message snowstorm coming. So this is basically a simple implementation and simple application of this. I'm going to show you just the blocks that were created along the path of us making this and the information that comes with it. So if we look at the blockchain tab again, all the way from the beginning we can see we deployed it all the way up to here where we ran our invoke, which if we look here we can see type invoke, the ID that it returned in the message, along with the chain code ID, which is our reference to our GitHub repository that we deployed, and the payload. And in the payload, if you can see here, it just says write to hello worlds, and the contents are going to be snowstorm is coming. And if you look here, even though we did 2 queries, we cannot see these in the blocks, because to query we're not changing any blocks, we're simply just viewing them. So there's no need to worry about creating an extra block on the chain. And finally, just to confirm, we can see that our chain code ID is still here on the blockchain network page with our unique identifier of it. You can also look at some logs that have information that the peers will be seeing and their validation process. But that's pretty much it for my use case. Throughout this process, I tried to do something a bit more complex and kind of got a bit overwhelmed by the complexity of blockchain. I had wanted to implement a currency exchange between a few people, but once it gets into objects, I got a bit in over my head due to my experience with JSON requests, which is what the APIs are using. But just for an explanation of what I was trying to do, and maybe if anybody else can give me some pointers, I was trying to create a blockchain where you had just an object that was a person's wallet, and it would have attributes such as the person's name, the amount of money they have, and it was as simple as that. You could probably make it more complex into what country of currency, US dollar, Canadian dollar, peso, things like that. And we wanted to have some functionality where person A could trade X dollars to person B, and that would be reflected through the blockchain. Um, I found a few resources that were very useful for this, but some of the code deprecated and was not really helpful for the current version of IBM Bluemix. So I decided to just um, save myself the headache and kind of just explain through this example. Um, Furthermore, I just tried to look at a lot of different examples that did some balance checking on if somebody doesn't have the money to trade to another person, where is that being checked, are the blocks being validated properly. Um, so there definitely was a lot of different steps to the process that I just wasn't able to accomplish this week. Definitely in the future, I would want to tackle this again and possibly implement this. I can see many real-world applications for it and usefulness in my everyday life for both work and personal uses, any projects that I want to tackle by myself. But yeah, this is my blockchain use case and demonstration of how the IBM Bluemix blockchain works, along with my process. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.